This is data visualization 205N. This is week number 2, lecture number 1. Welcome back. Uh, this week we're going to dive deep into a bunch of different chart types, visualization types. We're going to learn about where we use those, and then we're going to learn how to do those or execute those in Excel. So the objectives are to learn different chart types and graphs using Excel, learn how to edit them, select an appropriate chart type given the goal and the data type. We could actually spend a lot of time in this course talking about what your goal is. So, and I'll be more specific about that by saying that think about it as your reader has some task that you want them to accomplish. And so what task are they trying to accomplish? We think hard about that because that determines the type of graph that we draw. Learn different visualization types for different objectives, get insights from charts and graphs, and describe what charts should be avoided and why. We start these with a visualization makeover. Excuse me. Actually, I'm going to pull this down here, all the way down here. That's a good place. It's a good place for me. Um, so uh, yeah, the left-hand side is the not so desirable side, and the right-hand side is the desirable side. So let's talk about the left-hand side and talk about why it's not so desirable. I talked a little bit last week about pie charts. They are not my favorite visualization technique. In fact, they're one of my least favorite. And the reason is that they don't describe things very well. If you have a large number of categories like we have here, they just don't work well. And they don't work well for a number of reasons. First and foremost is because I can't uh, I can't easily compare two pie slices. It's not something I do pre-attentively. We're going to talk later about what that means, but it's not something that I can do, just intuitively. It's very hard for humans to judge size of pie chart area of pie charts. They can kind of do it, but not very well, not compared to bar charts. So that's the first problem. The second problem is I've got this overuse of color, which we're going to talk about next week, I believe, which means that I have all these different primary colors coming at me, which causes cognitive overload, what we call cognitive overload, which means it's just too much for my eyes and brains to process quickly. We're all about trying to process quickly, and I'll talk later about why that is. Uh, if I wanted to compare other city operations, this is a budget. If I wanted to compare other city operations to, say, Department of Transportation, I'd have to memorize $7,655 or 11% and compare that to 9,486. So once I do that, I can see that other city is smaller than the green one, but I can't do that until I've done that whole set of cognitions versus if I'm in a chart, I can just compare the size of the bars. Now you could say, well, put them next to each other. It's actually harder when they're next to each other. So in general, pie charts don't work. They work well where you have a small number of slices and you're just trying to compare basic fractions, half inch, thirds, or sorry, not half inch, half, third, one quarter, that sort of thing. Beyond that, they're really not useful. So here's the makeover. This is still showing how the 100% of the budget is allocated into different departments. But what I'm showing it, first of all, I sorted these by size. Now this is sorted by size: education, then environment, then Department of Transportation, so on and so forth. But I can see that obviously, actually, it's not sorted by size. I'm going to correct that because we slipped in computer equipment in here somewhere for some reason. This is sorted by size, highest to lowest, because usually that's what I'm interested in. That's what I'm interested in my user or my reader understanding is what's the biggest, what's the smallest, and maybe I'll highlight one of these in a different color because I want to call attention to, hey, New York City isn't spending very much on Department Administration of Justice, as an example. So this is much more desirable. I posted the amounts like I did over here, but I posted them next to the bar. And I turn this bar horizontally because you see how these titles are pretty long? That just works better in a horizontal format than a vertical format because if I do it in a vertical format, I have to put those that like take housing and economic development. I'd have to turn that horizontally, or at least I'd have to slant it. You've all seen those. Those are hard to read. So it's much more difficult to read that and make sense of it than if you lay it horizontally. And when you lay it horizontally, you have a lot more space to lay out the titles. So whenever you have long titles and you're putting up a bar chart, good plan is to do it horizontally. Um, okay, so how do we select an appropriate chart? Well, charts can show basically four things. They can show composition. That's the breakdown of a whole entity into its components. That's a lot of what we were doing here, composition. They can show ranking. They can show ordering the items in the order of a contextual importance. Okay, here they're ranked also. They can show relationships, identifying patterns between pairs of variables. This doesn't do that. This isn't a paired XY chart. Or they can show distribution, the dispersion of the components. We're going to go through those separately. All right, so last week we created a chart in Excel. And I want to just point out one thing that you're not really limited. You're not limited to making all the data items in a chart together. Let me show you what I mean by that. If I go in back into my zoo data, if you recall my zoo data from last week, and if you recall, if I just did this and said insert a let's see, I think we were doing a bar chart. Sorry, a line chart. So if I just said insert a line chart, I get a line chart. I get attendance in, well, attendance, and I get the months across the bottom. Okay, now imagine that this is a more complex, a bigger table, more complex. And instead of having attendance right next to month, maybe I have average temp. And I have a set of values in here. And so now I still want to plot this month versus attendance, but I've got these intervening column. Now this sounds like a trivial example, but the example applies anywhere. You could have a great big table. For instance, you could have maybe this was year, and each of these was the individual months. Anyway, to do that, all you have to do is you select the first one. And then with the control key down, holding down the control key, I select the second. So now I've selected the two data segments that I want without selecting the average temp. And again, when I do that and I say draw my chart, I get the same chart. So there's just a little trick to know about when you have a big complex table and you want to chart just certain columns, which is very often the case. That's a simple way to do it. Okay, so this is a set of improvements that we've made to this chart. So this chart on the left is the default chart that I got out of Excel. It puts the title in the center. It puts the labels. It puts the grid axes like this, so on and so forth. I don't quite like that. It's close, but I don't quite like that. So almost always when you get a chart out of Excel, you're going to want to do some editing on the chart in order to improve its appearance. And there's detailed steps in your textbook about how to go to do that. But you see what happened is we moved zoo attendance over to the left. I'll just mention one thing while I'm here because I meant to mention it over here. Excel, in my opinion, always draws the title to not bold enough and the legends not bold enough. So I always, virtually always go through and make the legends, the X and Y or the Y and X legends bold. I might even make them bigger if that's appropriate, bigger type font. And I bold the title. And in this case, I really want those to be separated with commas, but I won't bother with doing that now. Actually, I'll go ahead and do it. So for this, I want to go to its number format. Where is that? Actually, I'm not going to bother doing that. I don't want to go down that track right now. Okay, so Your book has, detailed description about how to put this axis line in, how to put these tick marks in, how to move the title over to the left. I'm going to recommend you do that on every chart that you do, just so you get into the practice of that. When you turn in assignments, I expect that you have done this. So I expect your assignments to be, no, I not just, oh, phew, I got the chart working in Excel. I expect it to be a, production ready finished chart. So you want to pay attention to what it is, to how it's laid out. Okay, so let's talk about a scatter chart. Actually, let's first talk about what a scatter chart is. So here's what we're trying for. And this has a scatter chart has two variables. Let's just go back up here. When we talked about zoo attendance, well, we had two variables, but this was a ordered variable. Went January, February, so it was a time series. So it had implied order on it. With a scatter chart, you don't really have an implied order on this. You have a ranking. So this is the average low temperature. Let's see, 51 cities. So it took 51 cities. Each of these dots represents a city. I'm going to guess it's 50 states plus the District of Columbia. And here's the average low temperature. I'm sorry. Yeah, here's the this dimension is the average low temperature. I'm going to say that differently. This dimension is the uh, annual snowfall. This dimension is the average low temperature. And so what this is saying is it's saying that there is a city where the average low temperature is about 42 degrees and they get 100 inches of snow. My guess is that's a city in Alaska, although it could be North Dakota or something like that. And likewise, there's a city that gets no snowfall ever, average annual, they never get snowfall, and their average low temperature is 70 degrees. I'm going to guess that's down south somewhere, maybe in Phoenix, something like that. Anyway, it's in a desert or a hot climate. So that's what a scatter chart does. It compares two values. It puts the magnitude of one on the x-axis and the magnitude on the other on the y-axis. And very often, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find trends, and not particularly in this case, although you can infer a lot of stuff. You can infer. Actually, I won't tell you that because that's going to be one of the things to think about. Okay, so let's figure out how to do this. So I'm going to select C1 to actually. So you want to download Snow. It's in section 2.3 in your textbook. So practice active listening. Pause the video while you go out to your textbook. You get the file Snow. You download the file Snow, and then you can pick it up. I'm not going to pause, but you can pick it up. You can start it again when you're ready to go. You have this data set in, and let's go back here real quick. It says select C1 to D52. Okay, so I'm leaving out the state and the city name, and I'm just doing this. So I'm starting here, and I'm going over to here. And if I didn't mention it earlier, Excel is pretty good about just being able, you can just pick the whole column, and it's pretty good about knowing where the data set ends, and so it just uses that. That's not always the case, but it's often the case. Like if you do something where you count blanks, you'll get a huge number here. In fact, that's what we did last time. We used this formula called count blank. You'd get a huge number here because it's going to count all the blanks in that column. But when you have something like numeric data you're trying to graph, Excel is smart enough to know that that's all you're really trying for. Okay, and then we are making a scatter diagram. So it says Insert tab, click Scatter. Oops. So we go back to Snow. I'm going to Insert, and I'm going to pick Scatter, and I just want this first one, and there's my chart. Okay, so that's a pretty good start. Again, these are not bold enough, my opinion. This is not bold enough. This probably you could put over to the left. You could do a few, you might or might not take the grid lines off. I think in their example, they take the grid lines off in the author's example. Okay, so um, each point represents a pair of measurements. So it's not one measurement, it's a pair of measurements. One is the average snowfall and the other is the average low temperature. And then the question is, how does the average amount of snowfall change as you get to warmer weather cities? Let's go back to that picture. How does the average snowfall That's how high we are here change as we go warmer. So as we go from average low temperature of 40 to average low temperature of 70, we can see this drops off. So this would make intuitive sense. As it gets warmer, cities that are warmer have less average annual snowfall. In fact, there are lots up here above, 55 that get virtually no snowfall. That's the way you interpret a scatter chart. And we're going to do a fair amount with scatter charts where we try to find trends in these. And there's a trend here. It basically says the trend is this is actually a negative correlation. It says the higher the temperature, the lower the snowfall. So scatter charts are really useful for exploring pairs of quantitative data, and we have a lot in nature. Pairs of quantitative data occur a lot, and because of how we observe them, and we have a lot of uses for scatter charts. Okay, let's build a bubble chart. So you want to pause the video. You want to go to 2.3. You want to download airport data. I'm going to go over there. I already have that downloaded. You can pause the video and do that, but I've already got it downloaded. And select B2 to D16. It's important that you select these cells, B2 to D16. If you select the titles, you'll get something different, and it won't look like what you are expecting to get. So you want to start from this guy, leave the title out, and put that in. Now, the reason for all this is that Excel has gotten quite intelligent and smart about assuming that there's a title adjacent to the data. Is the simplest way to say that. And so it makes a lot of decisions about how it's going to graph based on the assumption is that there's titles adjacent to the data. Same over here. So when I say insert, we're doing a bubble chart, which is in these charts, and it's down here in the bubble. So there's my bubble chart. Now, once again, I would edit this. I'd take the zeros off of this legend. Um, I'd take the zeros off of this legend, so I just make it 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. And then I'd put a title on that would told me what in the world I'm looking at. Let's go look at the slide. That is the what we got. So actually, this has that editing done. Airport tashers, TSA wait times, and cost of parking. So we've got the cost of parking, cheapest parking rate, and we've got the TSA wait time. So if we had left off airport passengers, then that would just be a scatter diagram. So we'd have a bunch of airports, and each point would represent a single airport. What we've done is we've added a third dimension to it. That's just the way to think about a bubble chart. It adds a third dimension that we're visualizing, and the third dimension in this case is a cool term, I guess. Uh, I'm uh, I'm always um, I'm a bit sarcastic about how the airline industry wants to come up with their own term for things, for descriptive term for things. So they call that enplanements because that they could do that in one word versus saying, passengers per plane or something like that. Anyway, that's enplanements. That's a number of passengers that were presumably departing from that airport. And so the bigger the size, the more passengers. So I'm not a big fan of bubble charts. I'll tell you why later, but um, this is pretty good for this because what I'm just trying to show is, well, actually, I'm not sure what they're trying to show. These are three weird variables to put together. This was just done as an example. I'm not sure why you would do this, why you would compare TSA wait time to cost, cheapest rate of parking to number of departures. It just except maybe to show that there's no relationship. There's no relationship between cost of parking and TSA wait times, and no relation of any of those to number of enplanements, although I guess you get bigger circles as you have longer wait times, kind of. Anyway, so a bubble chart introduces a third quantitative variable, which is the size of the dot. So for each airport, we have three quantitative variables. On the horizontal axis, we have the average wait time. On the vertical axis, we have the cheapest on-site daily parking rate. And the bubble size is the number of departures. Millions of passengers departed. Okay, let's move on to a line chart. A line chart is like a scatter chart. Think of this as a scatter chart with lines between the dots. So the right way to read this is that where I have a dot, I actually have an observation. So this is some kind of sales and year. And so every year, because there's actually a 1 and a 3 and a 5 between these. So every year I have a sales figure. In this year it's about 90. This is in millions. And this year it's about 92 or something like that. And this year's a little over 100 and so on and so forth. So I have an observation where each of these points is. I actually don't have observations between these. So I didn't take an observation of sales um, at year 1.5. Now, with sales, I can pretty much guess what that is. I can guess that that's, lies on this line. But it could have been that sales were zero if I took a reading at a certain point in time. So th these could go wildly between these. So it's a little unfair. It's not quite intellectually honest to draw lines between these, but we do this routinely. And we're actually going to do this in visualization a lot. We're going to assist the user, the reader, in making sense of the chart by adding visual aids. And in fact, a line chart really is just a visual aid over a scatter diagram that has the actual data points on it. So it makes it easier for a reader to see trends, to see progression over time. Okay, how do you build a line chart? We're going to use Cheetah. So pause the video, if you will. Go get the Cheetah file. I'm going to get the Cheetah file. Here it is. And I'm going to select B1 through B11. Cheetah. B1 through B11. So let's pick this. So it's saying just pick this. Don't pick the year. I'll show you why in just a minute. Don't pick the year. Just pick B1 through B11 and insert a line chart. So when I bring this up, I have a lot of different choices. We wanted the one with the dots on it. So let's pick that one. And so we reproduce that chart we saw in the slide. So what's happened? So you notice that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is the same as the year here. So Excel has made the assumption, I guess I'll call it, has interpreted this cell as the legend, which is the correct thing to do. And that's very often what you have going on. Now, if I had instead, actually, let's do this. If I instead done this, let's take this guy away for a minute. If I had instead done this and said, insert this dotted line chart, you see what happens. I get the sales in million, but I also get this line across here, which is counting from 0 to 10. I don't want that. And this is because Excel didn't interpret this as a legend. It interpreted it as another data value. So you don't want to do that. You want to let Excel work the way it's supposed to. So instead, uh, you want to just use this guy. Uh, insert a line chart. And you notice this is the one with the dots on it. I could have chosen the one without the dots on it. And I'll just mention, excuse me, it's very commonly done that I have a line chart and I don't show the dots. I show it without the dots. I show it in this form. Let's see, let's go back. I show it in this form. So I take the dots off. Um, and this is because readers are so well trained to know that this line doesn't necessarily represent specific observations at every point, but it represents the average, or not even the average, the trend of the points over time. And that's really the point. And then again, I always suggest that you edit the chart, make your title meaningful, make sure your legends are accurate. Let's just go back here real quick. So I did a pretty good. Oh, so these didn't have decimal points anyway, so that did a pretty good job of that. Okay, multi-line chart is very similar to a single line chart. We're going to use a data source which has two columns, I believe, cheetah region. So pause the video, go get cheetah region from 2.4. I have it here. Oops. And in this case, don't pick total sales because we don't want total sales on the graph. We just want Eastern and Western sales, and we don't want these guys. So just pick these guys. Oops, sorry. And I'm going to actually use the column. I'm just going to do it that way. So when I say insert in this case, now Excel gives me a little preview of what the chart's going to be. So there's a couple different ways I can do it. Um, let me start with this one. Okay, so this is I think what's reproduced in this slide. So I've got the blue is Eastern sales and the orange is Western sales. Now, while we're here, I'll just mention what this other chart type was so that we don't get confused. So this is what we want, right? But Excel gave me the option to put a different kind of chart in, which was this chart. And this chart, you look at it at first and you say, well, huh, this doesn't make a bit of sense. Excel really messed this up. Well, you can argue whether it's messed up or not, but what it did was it took Eastern sales, that's this blue one, and then it drew Western sales as an augment to that. So this is like a stacked line chart. I've never heard of a stacked line chart, but that's what it's reproducing. That's why I think it's a little weird. But I understand what it's doing. I just don't think it's very valid. So it actually took whatever the sales were for the East, added to that the sales for the West, and it put that on top. So if these were filled, this might make more sense. But I've never seen a stacked line chart, kind of in the wild, if you will. So this is the type of chart that is appropriate for that data. Uh, oh, and so while we're at it, let's talk about colors. We're going to talk a lot about colors in a future lecture, but let's talk about colors here briefly. Cheetah sales. Okay, so this picked two primary colors. It picked blue and it picked orange for these colors. These are actually representing the same thing. And very often when you're representing the same thing, instead of using complementary colors, these are called, you want to use adjacent colors, which means they're adjacent to each other on the color wheel. And that's very simple. All have to do is have the chart selected, go up here to chart design, and you see this thing that says change color. Say change colors. Now, you could pick one of the predefined styles, but so these are all using opposing colors. These are using adjacent colors. And so this is saying, these are both representing sales. One is just the east and one is just the west. And so I might use a subtler pattern in here. That's what your authors recommend in your textbook. Yeah, they recommend doing something like this. And then they move the legend around, they move the title around, they put uh, 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 axis bars, they put tick marks, they took the background contrast off. Anyway, so this visualization is done well. It shows you readily that Western sales are well below Eastern sales until July, and then Western sales started taking off, and Eastern sales really dropped off. And so, if I was having a conversation with sales managers of East and West, I'd say, "Here's what's going on, guys. Overall, if I stack these two on top of each other, our sales are up. However, it's all because of Western sales. Eastern sales are way off in the end of the year." So let's see, was that Cheetah region back here? That was. Okay, so let's draw a total sales chart as a bar chart with uh, a Cheetah region. Yeah. So Okay. So let's go do that just so we know how to do that. Make sure we know how to do that. Cheetah region. And I think probably that was just total sales. So it was really just this guy. So I think what that chart was something like this, right? So I'm holding down the control key and I'm saying all I want is the year and I want the total sales. and then I say insert, and I'd like a bar chart, something like that. Okay, so here's another example of Excel incorrectly using the year as a numeric value. So that's how I got that, and it's easy enough to fix. Instead of choosing that, just choose this, uh, and I get a chart that makes sense. And Excel rendered this year as a quantitative variable instead of a legend. Okay, so to fix a chart, there's a series of steps to talk about how to fix that chart. I recommend you follow those. I'm not going to do that in this lecture, but basically they tell you how to post these values on top of the chart labels. They took the vertical axis off altogether because they're telling you right here what it is. They took the background legend off. They really simplified. This idea of um, minimum ink, the minimum amount of ink I can use to convey the storage. And this is a story, and this is a good example of that. Again, there's detailed instructions in the book how to do that. I'm not going to do that in this lecture. Okay, to create a clustered column chart, uh, we're going to follow this. So we're going to use Cheetah Sales again, Cheetah Region again, and we'll go B11 to C11. So we're just going to do the Eastern and the Western region. Don't select D11, or sorry, D1 to D11 because that's the total. We don't want the total. And then do what we did before, but make it a clustered column chart. Let's figure out how to do that. So I go to Cheetah region, take away that chart we had before, just pick these two things, say insert, and this is going to be this kind of chart. And all you have to do is look through these and say, oh, this is the kind that I want. And you got it. It's really that simple. Here's my Eastern sales, here's my Western sales. Again, I'd want to edit this before I presented it or turned it in because I'd want to put the title on. I'd want to bold these. I'd want to bold these. I maybe want to take the background legend off and just post the values above these bars. Yeah, and then also it suggests changing the color palette because these really are not different things. They're just showing the east and the west. And so I'm going to go up here to change colors, and I'm going to pick one of these monochromatic color schemes, which is really just using adjacent colors, same hue, but adjacent colors to represent the data, which is sort of, I'll say it intellectually more accurate because I'm showing sales in both cases. I'm just showing Eastern versus Western. Let's do the same thing and create a stacked column chart. So when I do so you want to go to, oh, you already have that. So you want to go to your Excel. When I do a side-by-side chart, what I'm interested, the task that I want the reader to accomplish is understand the individual sales, the sales of Eastern versus Western. Um, I can't tell from this very well what the total sales were. I can kind of guess that if I stacked this on top of that, it'd be up here and this on top of that. But I can't really tell what the trend of the total sales is. And so sometimes what you want to do is you want to emphasize the trend of the total, but you want to show the component parts. And so that's pretty simple. Once again, it's just a different chart type. Insert. Well, yeah, it's a different chart type. So I just look through here and I find the one I like. That's a stacked column right there. So there it is. So that analysis is a stack column. So you notice that what I can see from reviewing the top of the bars here is what the total sales are. Now, this has a disadvantage that if I'm the Eastern sales manager, I can see the total sales, and I can also see that my sales have dropped off. If I'm the Western sales manager, that's much harder to do because my Western sales aren't starting at zero. They're starting above zero. And so it's really hard for me to interpret what the height of this bar is versus this bar versus this bar. So it depends on what task your reader is trying to accomplish. what kind of chart you use, whether you use a side-by-side bar or a Dodge bar, or you use a stacked bar. Okay, think about the Cheetah Sports regional sales data charts. Why does the stacked column chart make the preferred data visualization choice over the clustered column chart? So this is a think session. What I encourage you to do is pause the video, think about this for a minute. I'll discuss it, but I'd recommend you think about it first before I just tell you what my thoughts are. Okay, the stacked column chart is preferred when my reader is most interested in what the total is versus what the component parts are. They might want to know the component parts, but that's a secondary task. The primary task is understanding what the total is. Second question, provide different examples why an audience would prefer to see the data visualized with a line chart or a stacked column chart. Okay, give that some thought. Um, I'd want to put up line charts because, yeah, I want to put up line charts when I want to demonstrate trends. And I put up stacked columns when I want to demonstrate where the total ended up. I'm going to show you one thing here. It may just be me, but let me go back to this. In my Dodge chart, side-by-side chart. I've looked at so many side-by-side charts like this that I can clearly see the trend of the orange going like this. And I can clearly see the trend of the blue going like this. And even if they were drawn in monochromatic, they were drawn monochromatically. If I did this, I can still see that. I can still clearly see that. Now, that is partly an artifact because I've looked at so many of these, I think. If I'm a novice, I might not see that. It might not stand out so readily to me. So that's why I would use a line chart. If I was speaking to a sales audience and what I wanted to emphasize was trend, I'd put a line chart up here. If I was speaking to a sales manager, a VP sales, head of all the sales, and I want to talk about total sales, I'd probably put up a stacked bar. I would not put up a stacked line. I thought that was just a mistake. I still think that's a mistake in Excel to even provide that. I might put up a stacked area chart, which we'll get to later, but I definitely wouldn't put up a stacked line. I'd put up a stacked bar because then I could show the trend of the total sales because it's easy for us to follow the tops of the lines, even if we're not experienced in viewing charts. And believe me, sales managers have seen a million bar charts. They've seen a lot of them. Okay, so that's my thoughts on the answer to that. Bar charts. So every bar chart we've done so far, we could show it horizontally as well as vertical. So anything you've seen so far, you could lay it on its side horizontally, or you could do it vertically. Bar chart is preferable if there are lengthy category names, which is what I talked about earlier. For time series data, you almost always put the charts up vertically because we are so accustomed to seeing time series go from left to right. So you almost always go left to right, earliest time to latest time, whether it's minutes or days or hours or eons or decades or whatever it is. You almost always lay those out left to right horizontally. You don't have to, but it's going to be much more intuitive and easy for your readers to grasp all that, and that's what we're trying for. We're trying to make it easier for the users. So to do any of these charts, you'd use exactly the same steps. You just pick the horizontal version rather than the vertical version. Now, choropleth maps show they can show quantitative or categorical data. When I have quantitative data, I can shade them with these kind of scales. And so this is the estimated population by state going from 567, which is probably I don't know where that is. It might be Rhode Island, somewhere up here, to 39,937,000, which is probably California. And so the shades of blue, they get darker as they get more population, uh, uh, indicate that. Let's go create one. So you want to go download the file from section 2.5. You want to download the file state population and select A1 through B51. Here's my state population. Here's the state. Here's the population. I'm just going to pick those two columns and I'm going to say insert, and I'm going to come over here to maps, and I want a filled map. Just that quick. Now, as it happens, geographic data is not that simple. When you're talking about states in the United States, it's really simple because the boundaries of the state are well defined, and there's data sets all over. And by the way, Excel and Tableau know all about the boundaries, and so they can use those. If you don't have that kind of boundary, it's much more difficult. By the way, while we're at it, maps are a 2D rendering of a 3D surface. The surface of the globe is not flat, it's rounded. And so this is a 2D, two-dimensional rendering of a 3D surface. Yeah, of a 3D object. And wildly distorted. Not necessarily distorted for the United States because you have to choose some way that you do the rendering, but what's wildly distorted is the shape of the size of Alaska and Hawaii. Alaska is, in these kind of maps, is always shown way too small. It should be about twice the size of Texas, and Hawaii is shown way too big. If Hawaii was drawn to scale, you couldn't see it at all on these maps. And we want to go edit that chart appropriately. So we want to tell readers what they're looking at. Estimated 2020 population, that's pretty good. So maybe all I need is population of states in the United States. Yeah. Here's a choropleth map of Amazon Fulfill. Uh, let's go make that real quick. Actually, I don't think I have that data. Let's don't do that. I'm gonna leave that as an exercise. There's a in 2.5, there's a data set called Amazon Fulfill. You want to go pick that. And there are yes, no answers. Yes, it has a distribution center. No, it does not. So that's a example of categorical data laid onto a map. And so you only have two colors here, yes and no. Let me get that bigger, sorry. You only have two colors here, yes and no. And the states are drawn whether they have a distribution center or they do not. I'll leave that as an exercise for you. Okay, heat maps. Heat maps are fun because they show a big batch of data in a relatively easy to understand fashion. So we're going to create a data table that uses shades of color to indicate magnitude first. So heat maps show magnitude, so some sort of magnitude. And so we want to go to same source sales in section 2.5. And the way you do this is really pretty straightforward. You just select the data and go up here to conditional formatting and pick color scales. And then I think they suggest picking the one that is this one. I think, yeah, red, white, blue. So you can see what's going on. Blue means good, in other words, above zero. Red means bad, below zero. And right around zero, it's white. So if it's if it's bad, the darker the red, the worse it is. If it's good, the darker the blue, the better it is. So this is called a diverging scale. And so the scale in the middle is white, and it goes from a light blue to a dark blue in the positive direction, and it goes from a light red to a dark red in the negative direction. So a diverging scale is what gets you that, and these are very useful for getting me as a reader to very quickly isolate on what's working and what's not. So I can see Austin is doing great. I can see that Miami, particularly in October, did terrible. And I can see that Miami was, sort of middling and average, and then it just started going down, starting in June, got worse, worse, worse. So I can interpret I can very quickly zero in on the trouble spots, and I can very quickly tell where, where specifically they are. So a heat map like this in a table format is very useful. In general, we don't like to present big tables full of numbers to readers because they're too hard to interpret. But when we do color coding like this, heat map color coding on this, it makes them very effective. Uh, okay. So let's build a tree map of brand values. So you want to go to 2.5, get brand values, and we're going to build a hierarchy chart, a tree map. So let me get that open. Brand values, here it is. I'm going to select all these guys, and I'm going to uh, insert. So you see, this looks like this is an icon that looks like what I want. So I'm going to pick that, and what I want is a tree map. So there we go. I got a tree map. Now this is not quite what I want. First of all, I don't really need the legend because I've already identified the legend through these labels. So I could just select that and hit delete. I don't want to take up any more uh, uh, space area with that. Okay, I'd like to edit the chart title. I'm not going to do in this session. So I have a tree map here, which is a start. So the idea of a tree map is that the area of the box represents the magnitude. So the area of this box, this blue box, it's called Apple. So I know it's a technology company because it's blue, just like I know that Facebook is a technology company because it's blue, or that Coca-Cola is a beverages company because it's orange. And I also know that Apple is the biggest because I can see that that is the biggest box of any of these boxes in this tree map. I can see that, well, I think McDonald's, the restaurants, is probably the smallest, and that's actually the problem with this. So I can't really tell that if I took this and I turned it on its side, would it be bigger or smaller than these? I think it's smaller, but I can't tell for sure. And that's the trouble with a tree map generally is that we're not very, we're excellent at showing, at understand, looking at a line chart and seeing that one is bigger than another, or that, this one is slightly bigger than that one. We're excellent at that. We're not very good when we get to any kind of complex shape, like a circle or a square or anything where we have to estimate area as opposed to just height. So I want to make one more change to this. I want to improve this. I deleted the industry legend. Then I'm going to go, so here's the structure. So we've got 10 brand values. We've got five industries: technology, beverage, leisure, automotive, and restaurant. And then within those industries, we have these different companies. So that's the example. That's the layout of it. What I'd like to do is add to these the size so that even though I can't really be precise about whether this area is bigger than this area, I can if I post the size on that. So all you have to do is you right click anywhere, you say format labels, and you select data labels. So go over to Excel, right click anywhere. You see this menu pick up here, pick from here, and pick data labels. Uh, yeah, I didn't get it. Try this again. Select, I'm sorry, data values. Data label suck. There we go. I still didn't get it. I'm not sure why I'm not getting it. Series values. I'm not sure why I'm not getting these. Maybe format data series overlapping. Banner kind of helps, but that's not really what I wanted to do. I'm going to say like this. I don't understand why. I'm not getting any data labels on this. I actually can't tell you why that's not working. That should work, but I can't tell you right now why that's not working. That should work, and it should post this. Let me get this up. It should post the value here. For some reason, I'm not getting those. I just want to mention that Excel is changing all the time. They're improving it. Mostly they're improving. They're making changes all the time. Mostly they make improvements to it. And when you have really prescribed steps in a textbook, and if you follow those exactly, it doesn't always result in what you want because Excel has changed kind of the underlying behavior. So you have to be a little flexible. When you get these instructions, if they don't work exactly the way you want to fiddle around with the Excel a little bit to make them work the way you want. Okay, I'm gonna stop this lecture at this point, and I will see you next time.